Hey, it's Ben, and this is Drambo by Beep Street. I'm gonna walk through a new rack that you can download from Patch Storage, which is called String Thing, and it's a virtual MIDI strum controller. So it's a MIDI rack that sends MIDI out either into Drambo or to audio units in Drambo or to hardware, and it lets you strum through different like guitar or stringed instrument chord voicings. You can strum with a strum plate or like a slider. I have it mapped to the scene fader. You can map it to MIDI as well if you wanted to, like a mod wheel. And then it also lets you strum with a keyboard in ranges C1 through C2. You can sort of dynamically strum and also pick individual notes. And I mean, I wanted to see if this was possible. It was possible, so I decided to roll with it. And you can select different chords. You can configure the chords and the string tuning. By default, when you download the rack, it's in just like standard guitar. There's 6 strings. You can expand it to like a 12-string kind of thing. Anyways, I will walk through the controls and then I'll kind of like unpack it and show how it works. Okay, when you download the rack, it's a MIDI rack, so if you're using it with just Drambo like instruments, you have to send the MIDI into a MIDI to CV module, which will be on all the tracks in most cases. So if you want to, you can just leave the MIDI to CV here. You'll save the rack into Drambo when you download it from Patch Storage, and then open it as a MIDI rack. So I have it here. I actually have it a couple places. Those are all the different versions. So it goes before the MIDI to CV. If you're sending it into an audio unit, then you just send it into an audio unit and it'll have its own MIDI input. So I'm using the nylon guitar sampler preset that just comes like factory, but you can use it with any sound. The controls that are exposed at, like when you open it, are input, and input has the slider, which you use to strum. You can change the input to keyboard, and again, keyboard uses notes C1 through C2 in Drambo. A keyboard controller might show like an octave up or octave down, but you'll figure out what the range is. And if you just tap anywhere, the strum position that you can see in string view is going to instantly move to the new location. If you're holding down on a note and then you press another note, that's where it's actually going to strum. So you can use velocity to control the strum speed. If you let go of the note that you pressed and you're still holding down on the original note, it'll strum back, and then a higher velocity will be a bigger strum. There's Strum Mode, which is up and down, so that's both ways, or just down. And I think, if you were holding your guitar, this would actually be strumming up, but I labeled it down because it's going from the lower strings to the higher strings. Again, it doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense to me. That's how they're labeled, so up and down. But that will only, if you're using keyboard, you can still press the note, but when you're actually strumming between notes, the note won't sound that way. Okay, so chord selection is on notes F2 to E3. This is just how it's set up when you download it, but F2 is going to be like an open, not even a chord, I mean it's a chord, but open strum, and then each note between F2 and E3 are going to be different chords that are configurable, but I have some basic guitar chords already set up. I'll go back to slider for now, and I have slider mapped to the fader. So we'll come back to all this stuff. I think most important would be like starting with strings and chords. So you can set your own tuning too, and you can actually take away strings. So if you wanted like just a 4-string instrument, you can switch off the high strings or any of these strings, but they're turned on by default. To set your tuning, the way I wanted to do this, you could change it if you unpack it, but I thought it made sense. You set the low string, so in this case it would be like the low E. I'll go back to keyboard for a second. So C#1, that's like low E. You actually set the pitch, like the exact pitch value. All the other notes are going to be tuned relative to the string before it. So in regular guitar tuning, I hope it's the A string, is tuned a fifth above the E. So E, A, G, I think maybe. I don't know. But that's how the tuning works here. I'm not a great keyboard player. I'm also not a great guitar player, and I figured I would combine them and be a not great keyboard guitar player. But for me, this was better to like select a tuning because I'm used to like tuning my instrument that way, just pitches relative to each other. You could unpack it and then make each pitch module like independent. But that's one of the new cool things about layers, is that they can grab input from a layer above them in the signal chain. So I'm using that here. In addition to setting the pitch, you also can set like a bend amount. So like maybe you wanted to bend a string up, like a fifth. It won't do anything here, but you have bend controls that you can then use. So you have to trigger a new note. You can't like have a sustained note and then bend it. In the future, if we can create like MPE compatible racks, then you might be able to do that, like for sending MPE signal. You can't do it right now, or I couldn't figure out how to do it. But that's what the bend is. I haven't used this too much, but you could MIDI learn these as well. Okay, so that's your string editor. And then the chords are over here. So you open the chord editor and then you have 12 chords. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, going through the notes. So starting on F2 is the open here, and then F sharp is going to be the G, so on and so forth to E3 will be your last chord down here. When you open these up, it will vaguely resemble a fretboard. This, again, I was just sort of trying things out, and I liked this visual way to set notes. So up at the top of the fretboard, if you're thinking of like, how tablature looks or chord diagrams, when the CV sequencer's 6 steps are filled in like all the way up to the top, that's a maximum value, and that is going to be like an open note. And then I just figured 24 frets was a good amount, so it's 24 like wide grid divisions. So this is open, and then this is on the 24th fret, and then anywhere in between it. So, this kind of looks like a G chord diagram, and this sort of looks like a C chord diagram. It's not the most fun to set those, but once it's set, you have it and you can just play around with it. One of the reasons I think this is cool is that you could obviously like create your own. You can play chords on a keyboard and you can kind of make it sound like you're strumming, but the open string aspect of it kind of gives it interesting voicing. So especially for open tunings, which I'm gonna This is just like an open tuning I like to play around with. Sounds really just rich, I think. And these are, you know, sometimes they're chords that you probably wouldn't play on the keyboard, or they might be difficult to play on the keyboard. And to kind of have access to that sort of voicing, strumming is, I think, it's just pretty fun. So try out different tunings. Don't just stick with the, if you want, don't just stick with the basic tuning. So I'm going to go back to regular old standard tuning. But that's the chord setup. You can rename these if you have a rack that you're going to save with a different tuning or different chords. You can easily do that. So you also have, I labeled it alternate strings. It's like double strings or alternate strings for if you wanted to have something sort of like a 12-string instrument. They're turned off by default, but you can turn them on. And then put the slider on. Yeah. So now there's 12 notes being sent out. We only have 8-note polyphony for a MIDI to CV. So real quick, I'm going to rig up a something that will let us have higher polyphony, so you can hear that. So what I'll need is a MIDI to CV. Oh, just something cool with the update. The module selector is now, you can move it around. And so we'll need a MIDI to CV. Now, if you want to do like keep adding, you just hit the little push pin, and then we can add stuff. So what, I need my sampler module, and then Highline guitar. We can copy this. Make that bigger. Okay, so to get our MIDI right, we need a MIDI to poly. And then I guess we want a MIDI mixer here and a MIDI mixer here. So MIDI to poly has 4 MIDI outputs from 1 MIDI input, and it splits the signal, splits the voices. So now all of our notes will sound, you can turn it off, you'll be able to hear it. So the strings are set up for like a 12 string. So it's an octave up for the first 4 strings. Strum, 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 and then like a double. Again, if this worked with MPE, you could like slightly detune the strings so it would sound more like a real instrument. Here, these are going to be like the perfect pitch being sent out. So for a double, it's just sort of like, okay, it's 2 notes. If they were slightly detuned, it would be really cool. You can delay the notes a little bit with a delay, so it's 0 delay to a second delay. And then you can set up your own tunings for the alternate strings. Again, it's going to be pitch relative to the like bass string. So here you can see it's 1 through 4 are octaves, and then double. But you could do like fifths or sevenths or whatever. Doesn't matter. I'll turn these off now. So that's strings, old strings. If we go to keyboard again, the keyboard, this section has like all of the, it maps the C1 to C2 into like the strumming part of this. But then it also has, they're muted, but it has an ARP module and then a Latch module. So if you wanted to latch those notes, they're muted, but if you tap the header, they will unmute. So if you want to, you can just do like a little arpeggiator. I guess I should latch them. So we'll do replace mode, and now I can just change chords. And if you turn the gate up high enough, that's when it will start strumming. It's a little bit hard to control, but I don't know, it's kind of cool. Just something else that you can do. And of course you can change all of the arpeggiator settings and the as played, you know, up, down, what kind of arp mode you want. I'll mute these. We'll compact that. Slew and velocity. So the way this is set up, because you're not like hitting notes, the notes need a velocity. They have to get their velocity from somewhere. When you download the rack, you're just going to use a slider to set the velocity. So if your Drambo patch or the instrument that you're using is responding to velocity, you can set that here. You can also do velocity of the key press. So here, the velocity is controlling both how quick the strum is, and then also the velocity of the notes. You know, these are grayed out, but when you open it, this is how you can set the curve. So for, like, if you're playing with a MIDI controller, which I wanted to, but mine isn't working right now, you can set the curve. So here, but I think it's, yeah. So these are both shapers. It's taking an X position, so velocity input, and then it's mapping it to a Y position. So this would be 1-to-1, whatever I play in velocity, it's going to send out. This is just going to change it a little bit. So here, you know, I'm playing maximum velocity, almost maximum, but it's sending out a little bit less than maximum. So that's what the curve is. And then chord, I don't even remember what chord is, so we won't worry about it right now. I'm sure it's something useful. I can't remember though. The slew curve is also useful. So this is setting the velocity of the new key press when you're strumming through. That is going to change the speed of your strum. So the minimum speed, I guess the fastest speed this is going to go at, is 24 milliseconds. So when I play a high velocity, it's playing at about 24 milliseconds, probably a little bit more than that. And then as I play lower velocity, it strums through it. Now, I can change the amount of velocity modulation, basically. So here, I'm playing really low velocity, which in Drambo is like up here. So when I set this lower, velocity changes the speed less, basically. So it's here I have it set pretty quick, so it's going to stay pretty quick. You can still hear a little bit of variation, but that's what this is really, the graphic shaper is doing that. And then there's another curve. Really wish I could remember what chord curve is. It may not even do anything. Anyways, don't worry about it. So here, I can just get rid of this. But this is the slew curve, so you can see it's like, you know, it's not just like a straight linear mapping. Lower velocities, higher velocities really, are all going to be pretty like close to maximum speed, and then as you get lower, it drops off pretty dramatically. So you can like zero this in for your MIDI controller and how sensitive it is to velocity, and then you'll be good to go. We can hide that. Let's just use slider mode, yeah. Okay, so there's modulators as well. By default, they're not doing anything, but under LFO shape, this should really say LFO or modulation selector. There's 2 LFOs. Really, there's 1 LFO, and then there's 2 like shapers. So you can create a shape for the LFO. That's what normal is, this LFO, and then custom is this LFO. Here it's really an LFO that's mapping or clocking the graphic modulators. And I use that because you can kind of visualize your strum divisions again. So if we go to the custom one, it's just playing a saw wave up through this linear graphic modulator, but I could do this. So that's like a custom little strum. And then the reason I used 1 LFO is so they're in like perfect time with each other. If I go back to normal, and you could map that, like Pluck it if you wanted to. So that is our LFOs. Turn it off. They are, when you download the rec, they're going to sync to like a new chord that'll re-trigger the LFO. You can turn that off if you want to, so it'll just change the chord, and wherever it is in the strum, it'll set a new chord, and then keep going through the same strum pattern. Envelope, a need to trigger, so it's also going to respond to different chords. And this can be really useful when you're setting chords. You can go in and, you know, let's try that G. You can change the speed of the envelope if you go down here to envelopes. So LFOs and ends, this is where you like control those modulators. LFO shape is really selector. I don't know why I didn't relabel it. So envelope is going to respond to velocity again. And then it's an envelope flex, so you can change, you can give it attack. You can make it much longer. Anyways, that's how it works. Turn that off. Mod direction, this is just setting it to, is the LFO or the envelope going up or down? That's all that is. So we can hide that. Okay. So if you wanted to mute notes, you can do that. For both muting like new notes and then also muting the like sustain of a note. So that your mutes are going to be C0 and then D, E, F, G, A for strings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here I'm strumming. You know, it might be kind of hard to actually mute them when you want to if you're trying to like emulate real playing, but it's something that you can do. You could also do this while you're strumming or like sliding. That's something that you can do. And then B is actually going to mute, like it mutes the strum, so it wouldn't mute notes that are sustaining, which I'll talk about in a second, but it mutes the strum. So you can leave it up and down, and then you can like select when you want to mute. It's not the most intuitive way to play, but maybe it'll, if you really stick with this, I don't know, maybe it'll become easier. But it's there. You can latch your muted notes, so I can hit latch and either do replace or toggle. So let's just say I want to mute first 3 strings for a little bit. So I'm not holding down on them, but they are latched. And then if I need to undo that, I just hit latch, and they'll all sound again. And then the mute pick, that's the same as clicking or pressing B here, B0. So this would be like if you want to map this to a MIDI control, you can map the button. You'll learn it. That's what that is. Okay, so the last section, it's the sustain. There's really a lot here. It's really only important if if the instrument that you're playing can be sustained, or if it needs to be sustained. So it doesn't really matter, here where I'm playing notes, because there's a release, but if we turn that all the way down, the gate that gets sent out is extremely small from here, the MIDI gate. And as you can see, it doesn't matter if I like hold down on a note, there's no sustain. When sustain is off. I'm gonna play an audio unit. I'll do audio unit instrument, and then Ravenscroft 275. It's a nice piano. So here you can hear there's a very short release in the audio unit itself, but the notes don't sustain, and it sounds really unnatural for a piano. So that's why the sustain controls are here. So I guess we'll start here. This is the sustain, like your input for sustain. So key sustain, you can hold down on a key and a note will sustain. Or when you're strumming, if you're holding down on a key, it'll still sustain. And then controller basically looks for this to be turned on, and the note that you played will keep sustaining, or the strum will keep sustaining. This will work for the slider as well. So what you could do is map like a pedal, MIDI map the switch to a pedal, and then it would hold down on the pedal, it'll sustain. Release on the pedal, it'll stop sustaining. There's a couple other things here, and I'm going to stay, I think, for the most part in key mode. So you'll hear, like if I'm sustaining this note, we'll go back to key. So I can hold down this note, and then if I play another one, that's great. As soon as I let go, it stops sustaining. The first mode is like, so I play this strum, and then I play a new strum. Everything keeps sustaining. So you're resetting the sustain, basically only for the first key that you press. And then any strum after that, it's not releasing the sustain. Now new, maybe there's a better naming convention for this, but new will be, I have this strum, and then I press another key to strum again, and it releases the notes that we're playing before, and then sustains the new strum. So you won't really use first or new in slider mode. Now you can still hold down a key, and that'll sustain them. There isn't really any new. Actually, there is. So you can hold down one key, and then if you hold new keys, it'll probably make more sense once you play with it, but I hadn't really thought about using that with the slider mode, whether you're doing it with a slider or a mod wheel or something. And then none, so you're going to hear this kind of weird thing. This is basically going to, it's kind of going to store the sustained note, and then there's another little gate. If you unpacked all of this, you'd see it. So we'll kind of reset this. If I just hit C1 on new, now nothing is sustaining. So when I go to none, we're not going to hear it like turn on. But now I can hit a note, go to the keyboard again. So it's kind of like remembering them. And then what this really should be used with is controller mode. And then we turn switch on, sustain on. So I can hit a note, it's sustaining, hit a new note. So without strumming and like holding down the strum and sustaining it, this is just all the notes are sustaining, and then there's going to be like a natural decay. Let me turn this off. And we'll open up, so not a Midi instrument, but like just a regular Drambo instrument. Another, it's just a cool thing, I don't think this was there before. Now in like, when you're keep adding, you have this pinned, you can switch like where you're going to add something. So I'll add in just an oscillator and we'll make it a triangle. Sorry. I wanted an amp end with a longer release. And just like a quiet sustain, but a sustain. All the same. So I think we're, yeah. So we're not sustaining right now. But if I turn this on, so you can see it's just gonna keep holding sustain until I let go. And if I turn it back on, it's gonna go there. So if you're playing stuff on the keys, it might be best to do first a new. If your note has no sustain, but like a really long release, or if it will eventually like decay, then you could leave it at none. So with like, you know, some sampled instruments, there's a natural decay. The instrument won't sustain forever, even though technically the Midi note is like, it's sustained. Here, you know, this would sustain forever. It's never going to go away until I reset. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I think it's better if you just play around with it. So this sustain, pedal release, sustain, this will basically just keeps your sustain control. And there's like a slight lag for when the pedal lifts. And I think that would be useful here as well. Go to controller. So you can hear it, it still goes. If you're doing key, it's still gonna like reset. What this I think is most useful for, so string memory, you'll hear this with the first and new modes. I don't think it does anything for none. So if you heard that, it's sort of like before, where like you hit the switch button and it comes on. So this will basically keep track of any notes that have been played, and until I turn off string memory, it'll keep playing them. Let's bring that down a little bit. And then if we just turn it off, so again, you could kind of match this as like, or map it and kind of remember a couple notes that you played. It's for string really. So if we change chord, so it just adds a little bit of extra to what you can do. What I would recommend is just play around with all these different settings and figure out what works for the instrument that you're playing. Mute Pluck is, this one's kind of cool. So I'll just go to key. So here, remember you can mute. So I can like cut out from my sustain, I can cut out a couple notes. I can play again, cut out some different ones. Now, you're going to see when I let go of these muted notes, nothing happens. I've muted them. With mute pluck on, I can mute the notes, and when I let go, they come back on. So what you could also do is hold them down before you strum, and then strum. Again, it's just sort of like you're muting it and then you let go and you pluck it. That's all it is. So, it's MIDI mappable. You might be able to use that, might not. Just keep in mind, or just so you know, not keep in mind, with C through A, you're muting the actual note. And so when you unmute it, the note kind of re-triggers, at least with mute pluck. With B, you're not muting any of the notes, you're muting the strum input. So you can't actually trigger anything there by tapping this button, because it's not muting the note, it's muting any input. Okay, so that's it. I know it's a lot. I really just made this to see if it could be done. I know it's not the most user-friendly, but the way I sort of envision this being used is to record in some samples, or maybe send MIDI to another app. It doesn't record MIDI amazingly in the app, so I can show you what I mean. And if we unquantize it, let's make this a little bit longer, or make the pattern longer rather. Oh, well, of course it's not making any noise because I took it away. We'll just do an FM. So it actually sounds okay. Let me try this again, where we actually record something. So that's okay, but it won't always be super precise, because how the notes come in the order that they come in is really important, and the speed. And so if anything doesn't record like exactly right, your strum isn't going to sound right. What I think you might be able to do, though, is use any number of MIDI recording, like audio units. So like you could record into Atom, for instance. Let's make this a little bit longer, and it'll actually record the notes. If I knew how to use Atom, this would be better. Let's record. So here it's actually recording into a piano roll, and all the notes are recorded. These are the notes that you're inputting. So like in my Drambo sequencer, these are the input notes. These are the actual notes that are playing out. And because recording is like, it's stepped in Drambo, you couldn't really record your strum plate easily. You could also, I think, I haven't tried this, you could record into like a Drambo MIDI. Let's get rid of these. And, well, we'll make this longer. So they're going to show up as chords. You need to unquantize. Let's get that out of here. Still recording. So these are the actual notes that come out of the strum, and it's going to be a little bit more accurate of a record. But mostly I thought this would be fun to like play live and then record the samples and then do whatever with them. Anyways, if you have any questions about this, you can just leave a comment on the video, or drop by the Beep Street Forum.